you are likely losing a massive volume of potential harvest to a phenomenon most growers ignore: nutrient leaching. The nitrogen and phosphorus you paid for are washing away before your plants can ever utilize them. To stop this financial and biological bleed, you must deploy a catch crop, vegetation planted specifically to capture and recycle nutrients that would otherwise be lost to the watershed. USDA data confirms that agents like annual ryegrass and oilseed radish actively scavenge this unused fertilizer, locking it within their biomass for future release. Today, we define the precise selection required to create this closed-loop cycle. This process does more than just generate free fertilizer. It suppresses weeds, fractures soil compaction, and prepares the ground for a fundamental biological reality. Nature maintains a relentless directive to colonize every available square centimeter of the Earth's surface. Yet, modern agricultural protocols frequently defy this biological imperative. The conventional practice of leaving soil fallow during off-seasons introduces a critical structural vulnerability into the production cycle. While a barren field might appear to be in a state of dormant rest, it is actually undergoing a process of degradation that remains invisible to the naked eye until the damage is irreversible. This period, often misidentified as a recovery phase, functions instead as a time of active resource depletion where the fundamental assets of the farm are liquidated by environmental forces. The land is not resting, it is experiencing a significant loss of its most vital components. We must consider the physics of the soil profile to understand the mechanism of this loss. When rain falls or irrigation is applied to bare earth, the water moves through the matrix as a solvent, binding with soluble nitrates and phosphates. These are the specific elements you have paid to introduce, intended to fuel the cellular expansion of your next harvest. However, without an active root zone to intercept and absorb this flow, gravity dictates the outcome. The water carries these dissolved nutrients downward, pulling them through the micropores of the soil structure and depositing them deep into the subsoil, far beyond the reach of any future crop's root system. This process of leaching is a mechanical failure of the field's ability to retain energy. Simultaneously, surface exposure accelerates vaporization, where solid fertility transforms into gas and dissipates entirely into the atmosphere, further compounding the deficit. The implications of this physical vulnerability are corroborated by federal analysis. Research indicates that bare soil significantly contributes to topsoil loss, an event where the upper horizon of the field is detached and transported away by wind and water. This is not merely a loss of dirt, it is the destruction of biological capital. Topsoil is a complex, living ecosystem that requires centuries to regenerate naturally, meaning that a single season of exposure can erase hundreds of years of geological accumulation. When this layer erodes, it strips the land of its inherent productivity, creating a sterile environment that lacks the organic matter necessary to buffer against drought or hold nutrient loads. This depletion creates a vacuum that forces the grower to intervene with external corrections. The financial repercussion of this cycle is severe. The soil's natural fertility, the grower must rely on increasingly expensive synthetic inputs to compensate for the deficiency. You are essentially paying for high-grade fertility that is applied to an unstable medium, only to watch it wash into the nearest watershed during the first heavy rain. This creates a destructive feedback loop where the farm pays for pollutants that degrade local water systems while simultaneously failing to nourish the crop. It becomes undeniably clear that the first step to increasing yield is not adding more fertilizer, but establishing a physical barrier to stop the loss. The deficit must be addressed by maintaining a living root system year-round to anchor the soil matrix. By keeping the soil biologically active, the root structures act as a physical net, stabilizing soil aggregates and preventing the physical detachment of particles. This living architecture transforms the field from a passive sieve into an active storage vault. Once the structural integrity of the soil is secured and the degradation has been arrested, the operational focus shifts. It is no longer a question of survival, but of optimization. The objective now moves to the selection of specific biological agents capable of not just holding the ground, but actively reversing the damage incurred during the fallow months. The solution to soil degradation does not lie in heavier machinery or more aggressive chemical applications, but in the deployment of a specialized plants are not cultivated for the dinner plate or the market stall. They are seeded strictly for their ability to engineer the subterranean environment. While the uninitiated observer might mistake a field of non-cash crops for an abandoned plot overrun by weeds, the experienced grower recognizes this vegetation for its functional utility. These plants function as an invisible army beneath the surface, actively improving soil health and preparing the matrix for future cultivation. cultivation. This biological workforce is broadly categorized into 3 primary divisions, each assigned a distinct tactical role within the soil profile: grasses, legumes, and forbs, a category that includes the powerful Brassica family. Understanding the specific function of each division is a crucial and standardized step in agricultural planning. The first division, grasses, acts as the biomass generator of the operation. Varieties within this category are adept at building significant biomass both above and below the ground. As they grow, their extensive root systems enmesh the soil particles, stabilizing the surface against erosion while simultaneously producing massive volumes of organic carbon that will eventually fuel the soil food web. While grasses secure the structure, the second division addresses density. Deep-rooted brassicas are essential for breaking up compacted soil layers that mechanical tillers often miss. In high-traffic farm environments, the soil can become compressed into a distinct hardpan, an impermeable layer that suffocates root growth and prevents water infiltration. The taproots of brassicas act as biological drills, penetrating these hardened horizons and creating vertical channels. When the plant eventually decomposes, these channels remain open, facilitating the deep percolation of water and oxygen into the subsoil. This fracture process biologically tills the earth without destroying the fungal networks that mechanical plowshares often obliterate. The third division, legumes, functions as the chemical engineers of the rotation. These plants possess the unique biological capability to pull inert nitrogen from the atmosphere, a resource that is abundant yet unavailable to most vegetation, and fix it into a plant-available form. Through a complex interaction at the root level, legumes convert this atmospheric gas into solid fertility. This process creates a reservoir of nitrogen that remains stored within the plant tissues, ready to be released to the subsequent cash crop upon decomposition. This biological synthesis eliminates the immediate need for synthetic ammonium nitrates, replacing an expensive input with a natural process. Collectively, this activity is referred to as nutrient scavenging. It is the active reclamation of resources that would otherwise be lost to the water table. Leached nitrates and minerals, which have migrated beyond the reach of standard vegetable roots, are intercepted by the cover crop and pulled back to the surface. The plant stores these elements within its cellular structure, effectively banking them for the next season. This ensures that the fertility you paid for in previous years is not washed away, but is instead recycled into the chaotic biological loop of the farm. By integrating these specific plant families, the soil is transformed from a passive growing medium into an active generator of fertility and health. Beyond nutrient management, this living cover effectively suppresses weed growth by denying competitors access to light and space. Furthermore, the continuous canopy increases soil moisture retention, shielding the earth from the desiccating effects of the sun and wind. Ultimately, these improvements lead to a greater yield potential for the main crops, converting agricultural waste into a premium resource. With the biological workforce identified and their roles defined, the challenge shifts to the logistics of deployment. You must now determine which specific agents are required to address the unique constraints of your land. Selecting the correct cover crop is a rigorous calculation based on the specific deficits of your soil composition rather than a randomized agricultural gamble. A generic seed mix often fails to deliver the targeted nutrient boost required for metabolically demanding crops, whether in a commercial operation or a diverse home garden. If your objective is to maximize yield, you must treat the selection process with the same precision used in chemical engineering. The central biological metric that dictates this decision is the balance between carbon and nitrogen, a critical factor in understanding how nutrients are released into the soil profile. A mismatch in selection often leads to nitrogen tie-up, a chemical bottleneck where the cover crop inadvertently consumes the nutrients intended for the subsequent harvest. When organic matter decomposes, soil microorganisms are the primary agents of breakdown. These microbes require nitrogen to fuel their own metabolic processes as they digest carbon. If the plant material contains significantly more carbon than nitrogen, these microbes will aggressively deplete the available nitrogen in the soil to balance their diet. This biological competition makes the nutrient temporarily unavailable to plants, effectively starving the crop you intended to feed. To avoid this immobilization, the grower must strategically deploy species that facilitate a balanced release of nutrients. To maximize fertility, one must prioritize legumes such as hairy vetch or crimson clover during the appropriate planting window. These plants are the heavy industry of the soil, capable of establishing a symbiotic relationship with rhizobia bacteria. This interaction allows the plant to synthesize fertilizer directly from the atmosphere. The bacteria colonize the root hairs, forming nodules where they convert inert atmospheric nitrogen into ammonia, a form the plant can utilize for growth. This is not merely cultivation. It is the on-site manufacturing of essential chemical inputs. By cultivating a dense stand of legumes, you are essentially stockpiling nitrogen within the biomass of the field, preparing a surplus that offsets the consumption needs of the microbes during decomposition. Conversely, if the deficit in your soil is physical, specifically the presence of heavy, compacted clay, the selection changes. Here, the forage radish acts as a biological drill. This soil moisture reserves that were previously chemically and physically locked away. The most sophisticated growers utilize a cocktail mix, layering these benefits to address multiple soil health parameters simultaneously. However, this strategy must adhere to the fundamental principles of crop rotation. To prevent the buildup of soil-borne pathogens, specific plant families should not be cultivated in the same location more than once every 3 to 4 years. This rotation ensures that the cover crop breaks the disease cycle rather than perpetuating it, maintaining the long-term viability of the production zone. By combining the nitrogen-fixing capabilities of legumes with the structural remodeling of brassicas, while respecting rotation intervals, the field is treated as a complex, multivariable system. Success in this protocol depends entirely on the calendar. You must time the planting to ensure maximum biomass accumulation before the killing frost or the designated end date. However, simply growing the plant is insufficient. The accumulation of nutrients remains strictly potential until the biological vault is unlocked. The targeted nitrogen and carbon are currently trapped within the cellular structure of the cover crop, held in a stable organic form. They are present in the field, yet completely inaccessible to the next rotation. To transfer these assets from the cover crop to the cash crop, the grower must execute a precise intervention to release the stored energy. This transition from a living cover crop to a bioavailable fertilizer dictates the ultimate success of the entire agricultural cycle. At this stage, the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium you have painstakingly cultivated are not yet accessible to your future harvest. Instead, these essential elements are trapped within the cellular structure of the cover crop, locked inside rigid cell walls and complex protein chains. While the field appears lush and productive, the fertility is biologically sequestered, held in a stable organic state that your cash crops cannot practically utilize. To unlock this vault of energy, you must initiate a controlled termination event, a process that requires the same meticulous timing as a chemical demolition. The critical variable in this execution is the carbon-to-nitrogen ratio, a metric that changes daily as the plant matures. This creates a distinct tension for the grower. If you terminate the crop too early in its vegetative state, the tissues are soft and decompose rapidly, but the plant has not yet achieved its maximum nitrogen fixation potential, leaving the soil underpowered. Conversely, delaying termination introduces a severe risk. As the plant transitions from leaf production to reproductive seed set, it begins to lignify, reinforcing its stems with tough, woody carbon compounds to support the weight of seeds. This high carbon residue resists decomposition. When it finally does break down, the soil microbes must scavenge existing nitrogen from the surrounding earth to process the excess carbon, effectively stealing nutrients from your cash crop in a process known as immobilization. The objective, therefore, is to strike the plant at the peak flowering stage. During this fleeting window, the plant has accumulated maximum biomass and nitrogen, but has not yet hardened its vascular system with lignin. Terminating at this exact stage ensures the residue possesses an optimal carbon-to-nitrogen ratio, which facilitates rapid microbial digestion and immediate nutrient release. Following this protocol prevents seed production, ensuring the cover crop does not reseed itself and become a competitor in the next rotation. Growers commonly utilize several methods to induce this massive biological turnover, depending on the available infrastructure. The most sophisticated mechanical approach involves the use of a roller crimper. This implement entails a heavy, water-filled drum fitted with chevron-patterned blades that rolls over the standing vegetation. The blades do not cut the stems. Rather, they snap the vascular transport system at the base, instantly preventing the flow of water and nutrients. The plant collapses in a uniform direction, forming a dense, interlocking mat of dying vegetation. This Green manure, mulch, suppresses weed germination by physically blocking sunlight while simultaneously retaining soil moisture, creating an ideal incubation chamber for the decomposers beneath. For those without heavy implementation, flail mowing serves as an aggressive alternative. This method shreds the plant material into fine particulate matter, dramatically increasing the surface area available to bacteria and fungi. While this accelerates decomposition, it sacrifices the weed-suppressing longevity of the crimped mat. In colder latitudes, nature provides a passive termination method known as winter kill. By selecting tropical species like sorghum sudangrass that cannot survive frost, the grower allows the first hard freeze to terminate the crop, leaving the residue to act as a protective blanket against winter erosion. Once the termination is complete, the biological machinery of the soil activates. Bacteria, fungi, and actinomycetes colonize the decaying plant matter, breaking down the cellular bonds and mineralizing the organic nutrients. This process creates a slow-release fertilization effect, perfectly synchronized with the metabolic demands of the subsequent vegetable crop. As the cash crop establishes its root system, the decaying cover crop releases its stored nitrogen at a rate that matches the uptake curve of the new plants. Over a cycle of consistent application, this technique is observed to significantly increase soil organic matter, a metric directly correlated with yield stability and drought resilience. This system of biological recycling effectively turns agricultural waste into the primary fuel for next season's harvest, reducing reliance on external inputs. However, this entire methodology assumes the presence of a functional soil profile. As urbanization accelerates and arable land becomes scarce, the quest for yield optimization is forced to move beyond the constraints of the earth itself. Just as cover crops maximize the temporal efficiency of the single acre, vertical farming seeks to maximize its spatial volume. The quest for yield optimization enters the standardized realm of controlled environment agriculture. While biological protocols improve the earth beneath our feet, they remain legally bound by the immutable constraints of seasonality and geography. A cover crop can fix nitrogen, but it cannot arrest a blizzard, nor can it induce a tomato to ripen during the freezing, short days of January. As the availability of arable land contracts under the pressure of urbanization, the global demand for consistent, high-quality produce persists, regardless of the meteorological chaos outside. This disconnect necessitates a foundational shift from horizontal expansion to vertical intensity. Indoor vertical farming represents the technological evolution of the yield concept, replacing the measurement of acres with the calculation of cubic volume. In these hermetically sealed facilities, the chaotic variables of nature, sunlight, rainfall, and pest pressure are systematically eliminated and replaced by a standardized, engineered ecosystem. The sun is rendered obsolete, substituted by banks of light-emitting diodes that deliver a precise photosynthetic photon flux density tailored to the specific metabolic requirements of leafy greens. The soil, once the primary bank of fertility, is frequently removed entirely, replaced by inert substrates or suspended root systems that dangle in a nutrient-rich mist. This isolation allows for a level of granular control that is physically impossible in an outdoor environment. Companies like Plenty utilize these sensor-driven frameworks to manipulate light spectra, humidity levels, and dissolved oxygen rates with surgical precision. Inside these towering production lines, thousands of infrared cameras and sensors monitor the microscopic growth rates of the crop, feeding a continuous stream of telemetry into a central processing system. This is where the biological strategy of the field diverges sharply from the industrial strategy of the warehouse. In the vertical farm, the stabilizing function of the cover crop is effectively replaced by data. Algorithms function as the new biological workforce, adjusting environmental variables millisecond by millisecond to replicate peak summer conditions 365 days a year. If a row of kale detects a suboptimal humidity level, the system automatically modulates the airflow to correct the transpiration rate before the plant experiences stress. This digital stewardship eliminates the dormancy phases required by nature, creating a perpetual harvest cycle where the plant is pushed to its maximum physiological limit without the risk of burnout. This precise manipulation allows for the production of over 4 million pounds of produce annually from a single facility, a volume that would traditionally require hundreds of acres of prime farmland. By stacking growth towers 20 feet high, the facility compresses the footprint of agriculture, bringing production directly into the urban centers where consumption occurs. This proximity drastically reduces the supply chain, ensuring that the nutrients synthesized in the grow room are not degraded by weeks of transit in a refrigerated truck. The facility functions less like a farm and more like a botanical factory, churning out standardized units of nutrition. It demonstrates that yield is no longer strictly a biological function of the soil, but a variable that can be engineered through infrastructure and code. These systems offer a complementary path, ensuring food security when traditional soil systems face climatic stress or contamination. When a drought widens cracks in the clay of a conventional farm, the vertical facility continues its output, unaffected by the external hydrological crisis. The fusion of botany and data science creates a fortress against environmental unpredictability. However, the ability to grow food without soil or sunlight does not automatically guarantee that the harvest reaches those who need it most. A technological marvel locked behind a gate serves only a fraction of the population, rendering its yield theoretical rather than practical. It becomes evident that neither the biological restoration of the soil nor the technological mastery of the vertical farm can succeed in isolation. To fully realize the potential of these calories, they must be integrated into a functional distribution network. We must recognize that the ultimate barrier to abundance is not agricultural, but structural. The final determinant of yield in the modern epoch is neither biological nor mechanical, but strictly organizational. While specific biological protocols optimize the earth beneath our feet and technological systems master the variables of vertical space, these high-yield engines remain functionally inert if they are isolated from the communities that require their output. A nutrient-dense harvest locked behind a chain-link fence or situated in an inaccessible district renders the caloric value theoretical rather than practical. Consequently, the greatest bottleneck to doubling yield in an urban environment is not a lack of nitrogen or sunlight, but a lack of equitable governance. History demonstrates that simply inserting green spaces into dense urban grids often results in operational failure due to a lack of structural support. Community gardens are increasingly being integrated into urban planning frameworks to support broader sustainable development goals, yet their development has often been characterized by an ad hoc and inequitable approach. This haphazard placement functions like a heavy machine assembled without a blueprint. It operates inefficiently and frequently breaks down under stress. To address this, strategic, spatially optimized planning methods are essential. This is not merely about finding empty lots. It is about analyzing the demographic and logistical data of the city to ensure equitable access and prioritize areas with the greatest need. The operational standard for maximizing this specific type of yield is found in the hybrid governance model. This structure functions similarly to a symbiotic biological relationship, requiring two distinct entities to sustain the whole, which neither could support alone. Research indicates that community gardens function best under a hybrid model of top-down support and bottom-up leadership. The top-down component involves municipal or institutional backing, providing the heavy infrastructure, stable water access, and liability coverage that a volunteer group cannot manage. Simultaneously, the bottom-up component relies on local leadership to manage the daily agronomy, conflict resolution, and harvest distribution. Furthermore, the physical existence of the garden depends entirely on the legal framework of land access. It is not enough to plant. There must be a rigorous protocol for resource distribution and, most critically, long-term lease security. Building soil health is a multi-year investment, a process that requires the accumulation of organic matter over seasons. If the tenure of the land is uncertain, the grower is disincentivized from investing in this long-term fertility. The system must guarantee that the labor invested today serves the community tomorrow. When these organizational hydraulics are functioning correctly, the metric of yield expands. It is quantified not just in kilograms of produce, but in social cohesion and food security. This becomes particularly visible during systemic shocks, such as the logistics interruptions seen during the COVID-19 pandemic. In these moments of crisis, the garden transforms from a leisure space into a critical node of neighborhood resilience, supplying fresh nutrition when supermarket shelves are empty. However, a system without precise calibration risks malfunction. Exclusionary practices can unintentionally limit access, meaning the benefits of the garden do not reach the most vulnerable demographic. This creates a closed loop where the resources circulate only among the privileged, failing to address the food deserts the project was designed to eliminate. True resilience requires designing systems that integrate technical agronomy with inclusive social policy. Startlingly, the benefits extend into the physical thermodynamics of the city itself. These well-planned spaces do not just produce food. They maximize co-benefits, such as enhanced food security and urban heat island mitigation. The vegetation acts as a thermal regulator, cooling the surrounding concrete matrix and reducing the energy load of the city. This crucial integration of agronomy with inclusive social policy is fundamental for creating truly resilient and equitable urban food systems. The garden becomes a permanent node in a larger urban network, securing food systems against future shocks. This holistic view redefines what it means to be a successful grower, proving that the final calculation of abundance is multifaceted. While vertical farms and community networks expand the definition of yield, the foundational step for the individual grower remains the biological restoration of the soil. The deployment of cover crops stands as the primary mechanism to arrest nutrient leaching and generate free fertility. It is the single most effective intervention to convert a passive plot into an active, self-regenerating system. To implement this, identify your soil's specific deficit, select the appropriate legume or brassica agent, and execute a precise termination at the flowering stage to unlock the stored energy. What aspect of this agricultural evolution surprised you the most, and what industrial journey do you want to explore next?